There is blood on the doorstep. A pacemaker ripped from its connection and left on the floor. An 84-year-old woman vanished without a trace in the dead of a desert night. Her cameras destroyed. Her dog silent. Her phone, her wallet, her medications, all still sitting exactly where she left them. And the woman herself, gone. This is not a story from the past. This is not a case with a resolution waiting at the end. This is happening right now, in the sun-baked foothills north of Tucson, Arizona, and someone watching this video knows exactly where Nancy Guthrie is. Before we go any further, if this kind of in-depth, no-nonsense true crime investigation is what you come here for, take 5 seconds right now and hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button too. Leave a comment below. Because every single subscriber, every single like, every single share puts this story in front of new eyes. And new eyes might be the ones that finally find Nancy Guthrie. Now let us get into it. February the 1st, 2026. Tucson, Arizona. When the sun came up that Saturday morning, Nancy Guthrie was already gone. Her daughter, NBC Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, would soon step away from the cameras she has worked behind for decades to make the most desperate plea of her life. The FBI would deploy hundreds of agents. The President of the United States would personally intervene. A $100,000 reward would be posted. And still, 13 days later, there is nothing. No arrest. No confirmed proof of life. No body. No answers. Just a masked figure caught on a doorbell camera, a family on its knees, and a kidnapper who may be watching this very video right now, thinking they have gotten away with it. They have not gotten away with it. And this story is going to explain exactly why. Nancy Ellen Guthrie was born on the 27th of January, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She was 84 years old at the time of her disappearance, having celebrated her birthday just 5 days before she was taken. She was a woman who had lived through things that would have broken most people, who had buried a husband far too young, who had raised 3 children on her own without bitterness or complaint, and who had built a life in Tucson, Arizona that was small in geography, but enormous in meaning. Her husband Charles died in 1988. He was 49 years old, taken by a heart attack during a mining trip in Mexico. Nancy was in her mid-40s, with 3 children at home, and the entire weight of a future she had not planned to carry alone suddenly resting entirely on her shoulders. She carried it. She worked in public relations at the University of Arizona for 17 years, showing up professionally, building a career, providing stability. She retired in 2007. She attended St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church faithfully, not occasionally, not when it was convenient, but every single week. She volunteered there. She was known there. She was loved there. Every person who knew Nancy Guthrie described her the same way. Sharp, warm, faithful, present. There was no dementia, no cognitive decline, no confusion about who she was or where she was or what her world looked like. She was an 84-year-old woman with a full mind and a quiet life and a family she adored. She had a dog. She had a pacemaker and chronic heart conditions that required daily medication to manage. She could walk, but not far. Perhaps 50 yards on her own before her body required rest. She lived alone in a burnt adobe home in the Catalina foothills, an unincorporated area north of Tucson, in Pima County jurisdiction, not Tucson city limits. That distinction is going to matter later in this story in ways that are genuinely maddening. On the evening of Saturday, January the 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie did what she did on many Saturday evenings. She went to her daughter's home for dinner. At 5:32 in the afternoon, she took an Uber ride to the house where her daughter Annie lives with her husband, Tommaso Cine. Annie is Nancy's oldest child. Tommaso is 50 years old, born on the 18th of June, 1975, in the Tuscany region of Italy. He is a teacher, 6th grade science and advanced placement biology at Basis Oro Valley School in Tucson. He and Annie have been married since September of 2006. They have 1 son together. Dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home was, by all accounts, ordinary, uneventful, the kind of evening that feels unremarkable precisely because nothing is wrong yet. Nancy was there. The family was together. And then the evening ended. At approximately 9:48 in the evening, Tommaso Cine drove Nancy home. Her garage door opened at 9:48. It closed at 9:50. Tommaso left. Nancy was inside her house. She was alone. That is the last confirmed moment in which anyone who loved Nancy Guthrie saw her alive. What happened next did not happen under the light of the following morning or the warmth of a Sunday afternoon. It happened in the specific, suffocating darkness of the hours before dawn, when the Catalina foothills are quiet and no one is watching. And someone knew that. Someone had studied that. Here is the digital timeline, confirmed by forensic investigators and law enforcement. At 1:47 in the morning on February the 1st, Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera disconnected. Not from a power surge, not from a technical glitch, not from a software update. It was physically disconnected. Someone reached up and ripped it from the wall. At 2:12 in the morning, the camera's residual detection system, a back-end layer that continues sensing movement even after the device has been physically removed, still registered activity near the front door. The camera was gone, but its ghost was still watching. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker application disconnected from her phone. That timestamp is the outer edge of the window in which Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her own life. She was either unconscious, restrained, already moved out of the home, or the phone had been separated from her. The pacemaker, the device keeping her heart in its proper rhythm, the device without which her health would begin to deteriorate within hours, had lost its digital connection. Whatever happened at 2:28 in the morning, from that moment forward, Nancy was no longer safe. At 11:56 the following morning, family members arrived at Nancy's home. She had missed a virtual church service with a friend. She never missed church. When she did not appear and could not be reached, someone came to check on her. They walked into a house where everything was exactly where it should be. Her phone on the surface where she left it. Her wallet. Her medication bottles. Her car in the garage. Every possession she owned was present and untouched. Every possession except Nancy herself. At 12:03 in the afternoon, someone called 911. Within hours, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had deputies on scene. Within a day, Sheriff Chris Nanos was telling reporters something that confirmed what the scene was already screaming. Nancy did not leave voluntarily. Given her limited mobility, she could not have walked any meaningful distance on her own. This is a crime scene. This is a kidnapping. Now let us talk about what investigators actually found inside and outside that home, because the physical evidence tells a story that is both deeply disturbing and forensically significant. Nancy's blood was found on the front porch, confirmed by DNA testing. Not a large pool, not the kind of catastrophic volume associated with extreme violence, but a clear, definitive presence. And a trail of it, droplets leading from inside the house in the direction of the back door. The pattern matters here. When someone is dragged unconscious across a surface, you see smearing. Continuous transfer. The kind of mark made by a body moving in sustained contact with the floor. What investigators found were individual droplets. Drops consistent with someone who was upright, or at least semi-upright, while bleeding. Someone who was walking or being walked slowly, while blood fell from a wound on the head, face, or upper body. This tells us the injury was not catastrophic at the point she was moved. It was enough to subdue, enough to draw blood, enough to leave a trail, but not enough to kill her in the house. Someone calibrated the force they used. Someone applied exactly enough violence to control an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility and a compromised heart. That calibration is not accidental. That is considered. That is someone who thought about this before they arrived. The pacemaker is the detail that haunts everyone connected to this case. Nancy's pacemaker was found inside the home, not still in her chest, disconnected, left on the floor. Now here is the medical reality that makes this so chilling. A pacemaker is not a surface device you can simply unplug. It is implanted beneath the skin, typically below the collarbone, with thin wire leads threaded through the veins and anchored directly into the cardiac muscle. Removing it safely requires a surgical environment, sterile conditions, general anesthesia, and trained medical hands. Ripping it out would cause catastrophic bleeding. The patient would not survive minutes. But the blood at Nancy's home was limited, not catastrophic. So what actually happened to the pacemaker? The most likely explanation is that the device was not surgically removed. The application on Nancy's phone lost its digital connection because the device was powered down, damaged, or because Nancy was moved far enough from her phone that the Bluetooth connection was severed. The device itself may still be in her chest with the leads intact, simply deactivated or malfunctioning from physical trauma or deliberate interference. But someone left it on the floor of her home. Someone wanted that object to be found. And when you think about why someone would want investigators to find a pacemaker on the floor of the home of the woman they just abducted, only one answer makes sense. It was a statement. It was deliberate. It said something to someone. Look how vulnerable she is. Look what I have done. Look at the power I have over her. That is not the behavior of someone running a purely financial operation. That is the behavior of someone for whom this crime carries personal meaning. Someone with a message they needed to send. And that profile exists in profound tension with the ransom demands that would surface later. Nancy's cameras were all disabled. The doorbell camera was physically torn from the wall. The internal security cameras were smashed. But here is where the suspect made their critical mistake. They did not cut power to the house. They did not disable the wireless router. They did not jam the signal. They went camera by camera and physically destroyed each one, which is the approach of someone who understood cameras were a threat, but did not understand how the systems they were attacking actually worked at a deeper level. Google Nest devices retain data that most people do not know exists. Residual backend logs, server-side timestamps, motion detection records stored in the device's local memory, and in cloud infrastructure that does not disappear when the device is physically removed. The FBI's digital forensics team, working directly with Google engineers over several days, extracted data from the Nest system that the suspect believed they had eliminated. From that data, investigators confirmed the timeline down to the minute. They confirmed the sequence of events. They confirmed that the camera was deliberately destroyed rather than simply failing. And from the fragments of internal camera data that survived the physical destruction, they assembled what they could. It was not enough for a facial identification, but it was enough to build a map of events. And maps lead somewhere. On the 10th of February, 9 days after Nancy's disappearance, the FBI released the doorbell footage publicly. Black and white, shot in the dim infrared light of a late desert night. A figure approaches the front door. They are wearing a black ski mask, gloves, a backpack, and visible at the right hip, the outline of a holstered firearm. Watch what this person does next. They reach up toward the doorbell camera with one gloved hand and try to cover the lens. One hand, blocking a wide-angle lens that captures a field of view too broad to be obscured by a palm. It does not work. So they reach into a nearby planter, pull out a potted plant root ball and all, and shove it in front of the camera. When that only partially obscures the image, they grab the camera itself and rip it from the wall. This sequence of decisions tells you exactly what kind of person committed this crime. Not a trained operative. Not someone who has done this before. A trained operative does not approach the front door at all. They cut the power from the utility box on the side of the house. They jam the signal from a safe distance before they ever arrive. They enter through a blind spot, an angle the cameras cannot reach, a back window, a side entrance, a point of access they identified during surveillance. They are invisible from the moment their car enters the neighborhood. This person was not invisible. They walked up to the front door in the field of view of the camera they were trying to destroy, improvised their approach in real time, and made the physical mistake of leaving the device in a position where its residual back-end data survived. That is not a professional. That is an amateur who researched how to commit a kidnapping but had never actually done one. And yet they had clearly done extensive preparation. They came with a mask, gloves, a weapon, a prepared backpack. They had conducted surveillance of the property in advance. They knew where the cameras were. They had a plan for disabling them, even if the execution of that plan was imperfect. The combination of detailed preparation and improvised execution is a specific and revealing profile. Someone who spent weeks planning but had no real-world experience to draw on when the unexpected happened. The FBI's Video Forensic Analysis Unit conducted a remarkable reconstruction to generate the suspect's physical description. They traveled to Nancy's home at night. They erected a blackout tent around the front entrance to eliminate all ambient light and recreate the exact photographic conditions captured in the footage. They used mannequins wearing clothing matching the suspect's description and tested different heights and builds against the known fixed objects in the frame. The door frame, the porch railing, the planter. They measured every proportion and generated a description that is now on billboards in 5 American cities. Male, approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build, black ski mask, vinyl gloves, black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. The Ozark Trail brand is available exclusively at Walmart stores. Inexpensive, widely distributed, essentially untraceable without knowing which specific store and which specific transaction, which is almost certainly why it was chosen. Now let us follow the physical evidence trail that begins outside that home. Approximately 1.5 miles from Nancy's residence, investigators recovered a pair of black gloves discarded near a road. These gloves are almost certainly the same gloves worn by the masked figure in the doorbell footage. The location along what investigators believe was the suspect's exit route from the neighborhood, the timing, and the manner of disposal all point in the same direction. The suspect shed their gloves as they fled, not carefully, not deliberately concealed, but simply dropped, thrown away on the side of a road while moving. That is the behavior of someone focused on distance, not evidence management. The inside surface of those gloves is potentially the single most important piece of physical evidence in this entire investigation. When you wear gloves, you deposit biological material on the interior surfaces. Sweat from your palms, skin cells from your fingers, microscopic fragments of who you are. If that material is present on the inside of those gloves, and if it can be extracted and profiled, it can be run through the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national DNA database, and compared against every person who has ever been arrested and provided a sample, every person who has ever been processed through the criminal justice system in the United States. If the suspect has any kind of criminal history, any prior arrest, any prior encounter with law enforcement that produced a DNA sample, those gloves produce a match. That match produces an identification. That identification produces an arrest. Those gloves could break this case wide open. We will come back to what is currently happening with those gloves. And when we do, you're going to be angry. Around 1:52 in the morning, witnesses in an area approximately 4 miles from Nancy's home reported seeing a figure in a gray hoodie and jeans carrying 2 backpacks. 4 miles is too far from the home to represent the act of abduction. This sighting either places the suspect before the crime, moving toward Nancy's home from where they parked a vehicle, or after the crime, having secured Nancy somewhere, and traveling on foot back toward their transportation. The presence of 2 backpacks is significant. One of them is likely the Ozark Trail pack visible in the doorbell footage. The second may have contained materials related to the abduction, tools, restraints, medical equipment, whatever the suspect brought with them to manage what they were planning to do to Nancy Guthrie. Investigators also made 2 very specific requests for neighborhood surveillance footage, and those requests tell us a great deal about what they believe happened in the weeks leading up to February the 1st. The first request covered the night of January the 11th, 2026, between 9 o'clock in the evening and midnight, 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. Investigators believe something significant happened in that neighborhood during those specific hours. The most likely explanation is that the suspect was conducting preliminary surveillance of Nancy's property during that window, walking the perimeter, identifying camera positions, timing the neighborhood's patterns, identifying the quietest windows of activity. If a neighbor's camera captured a vehicle or a figure that did not belong during those hours, it could place the suspect at the scene 3 weeks before the crime. That is not just evidence. That is premeditation made visible. The second request covered the morning of January the 31st, between 9:30 and 11 o'clock in the morning, the same day Nancy was taken, hours before Tommaso drove her to his home for dinner. Investigators believe a suspicious vehicle was in the neighborhood during that window, likely confirming that Nancy was home, completing a final reconnaissance before executing the plan that night. Someone drove or walked through that neighborhood on the morning of January the 31st, and investigators know it. They just need the footage to confirm it on camera. These 2 requests together paint a picture of an operation that was planned for at least 3 weeks, that involved multiple visits to the neighborhood, that was timed around Nancy's specific schedule, and that was executed with the kind of patience that comes from genuine obsession. This was not impulsive. This was not random. This was deliberate, sustained, and deeply personal in its focus on one specific woman in one specific home. One detail that has not received the attention it deserves is the silence of Nancy's dog. An elderly woman's companion animal, described by those who knew it as alert and protective, did not bark that night. Or if it did, no evidence consistent with a dog's alarm response was found at the scene. There are only 2 explanations for this that hold up under scrutiny. Either the dog knew the person who entered the home. The scent was familiar. The presence was not alarming. The dog associated this person with safety rather than threat. Or the suspect knew how to neutralize the dog. Not necessarily through sedation, though that is possible, but through familiarity with the animal's behavior, through some preparation that accounted for the dog's likely response. Both of these possibilities narrow the suspect pool. Both point towards someone who was not a stranger to that household. Within 24 to 48 hours of Nancy's disappearance, the first ransom communications appeared. Emails were sent to the entertainment news outlet TMZ and to two Tucson television stations, KVOA and KGUN. The demands were specific. $6 million in Bitcoin, transferred to a provided wallet address, with a deadline of 5 o'clock in the afternoon on February the 5th, 2026. That deadline came and passed. Nothing happened. No confirmed exchange. No follow-up escalation from the sender. A second deadline was set for February the 9th. That deadline also passed without event. Around February the 5th, TMZ's Harvey Levin reported receiving a letter claiming that Nancy was alive and scared. The letter's authenticity was not verified by any law enforcement agency. The FBI stated publicly that it was not aware of any confirmed ongoing communication between the Guthrie family and suspected kidnappers. On February the 11th, TMZ received a third note. This one from someone claiming to know the kidnapper's identity and demanding 1 Bitcoin, approximately $66,000 to $70,000 at that time, to a different wallet address. The following day, the same person sent a follow-up stating they were not being taken seriously. On approximately February the 11th, a Bitcoin transaction was made to the original ransom wallet address. The Guthrie family confirmed this. The amount was not publicly disclosed. Whether that transaction was made by the family as a good faith payment, by a concerned third party, by a scammer probing the wallet's activity, or by the kidnapper themselves to create the appearance of momentum, none of it has been confirmed. A retired FBI agent who analyzed the original ransom note publicly noted a linguistic detail that stands out to any trained observer. The note used the abbreviation USD when referring to the ransom amount. In conversational American English, people do not write USD. They say dollars. That abbreviation belongs to international financial documents, foreign exchange contexts, or the vocabulary of someone who learned English in an environment where that notation was standard. It suggests either a foreign author, someone with a background in international finance or currency exchange, or someone who deliberately wrote the note to appear foreign while actually being domestic. The demand for Bitcoin is also worth examining carefully because Bitcoin is not as anonymous as many people assume. Every Bitcoin transaction is permanently recorded on a publicly visible ledger called the blockchain. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, have significant analytical tools for tracing cryptocurrency movements, identifying exchange wallets where Bitcoin is converted into conventional currency, and ultimately connecting those conversions to real-world bank accounts and identities. Anyone with genuine technical expertise in cryptocurrency would know this. The fact that the demand specified Bitcoin as the payment mechanism suggests one of two things. Either the suspect is not as technically sophisticated as they believe themselves to be, or the Bitcoin demand was never intended to be fulfilled and was included as misdirection rather than as a genuine payment mechanism. Both possibilities raise the same unsettling question. Were the ransom notes real, or were they theater? There are 3 possibilities that experienced investigators take seriously. The first is that the notes are authentic, that someone has Nancy and wants money, but that the scale of the law enforcement response panicked them into silence rather than triggering the escalation that typically follows a missed deadline. The second is that the ransom demand was constructed as misdirection, designed to send investigators chasing financial leads, while the actual motivation for the abduction, something more personal, more calculated, unfolds in a different direction entirely. The third is that the notes were fabricated by opportunists who saw a high-profile disappearance and tried to exploit it for financial gain. We know for certain that the third possibility produced at least one arrest, because a man named Derek Kella made it impossible to ignore. Derek Kella is 42 years old, from Hawthorne, California. On February the 4th, the same day the Guthrie family released their first public video appeal, Kella sent fake ransom text messages directly to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Sign. The message read that a Bitcoin payment was being waited on. Imagine being in the position of Annie Guthrie or Tommaso Cyan, in the depths of this nightmare, and your phone illuminates with a message that seems like it might be from whoever has your mother. The spike of desperate hope, the terror that it might be real, the worst kind of false dawn imaginable. Federal investigators traced the VoIP line back to Kella's Gmail account and home address. When questioned, he admitted he had been following the story on television and had pulled family contact information from a data aggregation website. He had no information about Nancy's whereabouts. He had no connection to the crime. He was simply someone who saw a tragedy and decided to exploit it. The FBI called him a grief profiteer, which is one of the most accurate and devastating characterizations I have ever heard applied to a human being. Kella was charged with transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce and misuse of a telecommunications device, both federal charges. He appeared in court in Santa Ana on February the 6th and in Tucson on February the 13th. He was released pending trial on a $20,000 bond with electronic monitoring. This was not Kella's first criminal matter. In October of 2025, the Los Angeles County District Attorney named him among 13 county employees accused of stealing over $430,000 in unemployment benefits. He is a person who made a career of taking from others during their moments of vulnerability. His involvement in this case, though entirely tangential to Nancy's actual disappearance, serves as a reminder of how quickly tragedy attracts exploitation and how much investigative bandwidth is consumed by people who have nothing to do with the crime itself. Now we need to talk about Tommaso Cyan, because no discussion of this case is complete without addressing the scrutiny directed at him, and no discussion is responsible without being precise about what is confirmed and what is not. Tommaso Cyan is 50 years old. He married Annie Guthrie in September of 2006. They have one son. He has lived in Tucson and built a career as a teacher. He was the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie alive. He drove her home on the evening of January the 31st. The garage door opened at 9:48 and closed at 9:50. He left. Everything after that is the crime. On February the 4th, the FBI searched the home he shares with Annie. They returned for a second search on February the 8th. During the second search, a vehicle was towed from the property. Law enforcement personnel were observed inside the residence, with bright flashes visible through windows consistent with forensic photography. Around that time, Annie reportedly privatized or deleted social media photographs featuring Tommaso. Tommaso held a power of attorney arrangement over Nancy's finances, a legal designation allowing him to make financial decisions on her behalf. This is a common and entirely standard arrangement in families managing the needs of an aging parent. It carries no inherent indication of wrongdoing. Tommaso has not appeared in any of the family's public video appeals. He has not made statements to the press. He has not been seen publicly for an extended period. Now here is what has not been confirmed and needs to be stated clearly and without equivocation. Tommaso Cyan has not been named a suspect. He has not been named a person of interest. He has not been charged with any crime. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has repeatedly and explicitly stated that investigators have not identified a suspect or person of interest in this case. Sheriff Nanos personally confirmed that no one has been ruled out while simultaneously confirming that no suspects have been identified. A claim made by journalist Ashley Banfield on her podcast citing an anonymous law enforcement source alleged that Tommaso may be the prime suspect. Not one official law enforcement agency, not the FBI, not the Pima County Sheriff, not any named official, has corroborated that claim. Multiple individuals who reviewed the doorbell footage independently noted that Tommaso Cyan appears significantly taller than the 5'9" to 5'10" suspect described by the FBI's forensic analysis. If that height discrepancy is accurate, it would exclude him from being the masked figure who approached Nancy's front door. That does not resolve every question, but it is a material data point that gets lost in the noise of online speculation. The internet has already convicted Tommaso Cyan. Social media threads dissect his photographs. People measure his height against the doorbell footage frame by frame. They have dug into his immigration background, his marriage to Annie, his association with a Tucson band called Early Black, and its drummer, a man named Dominic Evans. Dominic Evans has been identified by online sleuths as a physical match for the masked figure, based on photographs and a reported criminal history. Dominic Evans has not been named by any law enforcement agency as a suspect or person of interest. The focus on him exists entirely within the ecosystem of internet speculation. A claim circulated widely that Tomaso had $50 million in gambling debts connected to a Mexican casino. It has been comprehensively debunked. There is no documentation, no source, no law enforcement statement supporting it in any form. It was invented and spread because people wanted it to be true. A document presented online as evidence of suspicious financial control by Tomaso over Nancy's estate was reviewed by legal experts who described it as a completely standard real estate transaction document with nothing unusual about it. This is the problem with internet investigation when it operates without discipline. It is enthusiasm without evidence. It is crowd behavior without accountability. If Tomaso Cyan is innocent, and right now that is exactly what he must be presumed to be under the law, then his life has already been permanently altered. His name is attached to this case in a way that will not disappear even if someone else is arrested, even if he is completely exonerated, even if the investigation produces no evidence of his involvement whatsoever. That is not justice. That is a second crime being committed against someone who may be entirely blameless. If he is guilty, investigators know things we do not. 13 days. 2 searches of the home. A vehicle impounded. Financial records examined. Cell tower data analyzed. If the evidence supported an arrest would have been made. The fact that it has not tells us something important about the state of the evidence. We report confirmed facts. We do not convict people in the absence of evidence. That is what responsible investigation looks like. Savannah Guthrie is 53 years old. She has co-anchored the Today Show since 2012. Before that, she was a legal correspondent. Before that, she practiced law. She spent her entire professional life asking the questions, controlling the narrative, being the person behind the microphone rather than in front of it in moments of crisis. And now she is the story. Now she is the daughter standing in front of a camera begging for her mother's life. And there is nothing her professional experience or her credentials or her connections can do to change the fundamental reality that her mother is missing and she cannot find her. On February the 4th, 3 days after Nancy disappeared, Savannah appeared before a camera with her siblings Annie and Cameron. She described her mother as kind, faithful, loyal, and fiercely loving. A beautiful spirit who volunteered at her church, never missed a service, was beloved by every person who knew her. And then she looked directly into the lens and asked, simply, without theatrical complexity, for whoever took her mother to please reach out. To just tell the family she was okay. That was all she asked. Just tell us she is okay. That video was seen by millions of people. And then nothing happened. No response. No contact. No proof of life. Just the silence on the other end of a phone that never rang. On February the 7th, the family released a second video. The language of this one was careful in a way that spoke volumes. The family acknowledged receiving a message. They stated they understood what was being asked of them. They committed to paying. They asked only for instructions on how to proceed. They were doing everything a crisis negotiation expert would recommend. Signaling cooperation. Demonstrating willingness. Removing every obstacle between the kidnapper and getting what they claim to want. Come to us. Tell us what to do. We will do it. Silence. On February the 9th, Savannah appeared alone. No siblings. Just her. She looked like someone who had not slept in a week because she had not slept in a week. She called what the family was experiencing their hour of desperation. She referenced the $100,000 reward. She asked anyone with any information to come forward. On February the 10th, she shared the doorbell footage with a single line. Someone out there recognizes this person. On February the 12th, she posted a montage of home videos. Nancy at a dinner table. Nancy laughing at something the camera cannot see. Nancy at church, in the pew she never missed. Nancy surrounded by the children she raised alone and the grandchildren she adored. Savannah's caption was 3 words. Our lovely mom. And then, we will never give up on her. Through all of this, Savannah has set aside her career entirely. She was scheduled to co-host NBC's coverage of the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremonies. She did not appear. The Today Show continues without her. Her professional life is paused indefinitely, and she has made that choice without apparent hesitation because it is the only choice that makes sense when your mother is missing. Sources close to the family describe a grinding, suffocating frustration beneath the composed public appearances. Frustration that 13 days have passed without an arrest. Frustration that law enforcement is not sharing information with the family. Frustration that they have done everything that can be asked of them and are receiving silence in return. Frustration about what the absence of Tommaso from the family's public appeals implies and what it may mean for Annie, who is caught in a position that no person should ever have to occupy. Annie Guthrie is Nancy's oldest daughter. She is also Tommaso Science wife. She exists at the intersection of two terrible possibilities. Either her husband had no involvement in what happened to her mother, in which case her silence is grief and legal strategy, or he did, in which case her silence is something far more complex. Every statement she makes will be analyzed. Every expression she shows will be dissected. Every absence will be noted. She cannot win in the public eye regardless of what is true. And so she says nothing. And in the current environment, silence is read as guilt by people who have no information whatsoever. Cameron Guthrie, the youngest sibling, has appeared alongside Savannah in some of the family's public appeals. He has maintained a presence. But the family unit that appears publicly is incomplete, and everyone who watches knows it, and no one says it directly. And that collective not saying fills the air of every press appearance the family makes. President Donald Trump called Savannah Guthrie on February the 4th and offered the full resources of the federal government to the investigation. The White House posted about the case on social media. On February the 7th, the president told reporters aboard Air Force One that he believed there were very strong clues in the case and predicted answers coming up fairly soon. 13 days later, those answers have not arrived. But the presidential involvement ensured federal prioritization of the case at a level that would not otherwise exist, and that matters in terms of resource allocation. FBI Director Kash Patel appeared on Fox News on February the 10th, claiming substantial progress in the investigation and confirming the existence of multiple persons of interest. When pressed for specifics, he provided none. Whether that restraint represents smart investigative practice, protecting an active investigation from tipping off a suspect, or whether it represents a gap between the public statement and the actual state of the investigation, we cannot know from the outside. But for the family, reassurance without details is barely better than no reassurance at all. The community of Tucson has responded with the kind of collective warmth that emerges when people recognize that what happened to Nancy Guthrie could have happened to any of their own. Over 400 people attended a candlelight vigil at St. Philip's in the Hills Episcopal Church on February the 4th. Nancy's church, the place that knew her not as the mother of a famous journalist, but as a faithful member, a volunteer, a woman who showed up every week and contributed something real. They gathered, and they prayed, and they left flowers at her home and tied yellow ribbons across the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. It is beautiful. It is a testament to the kind of woman she is. But it does not bring her home. Only evidence brings her home. Now we need to talk about the jurisdictional conflict that is generating the most public outrage connected to this case, and with good reason. On February the 12th, Reuters broke the story. Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff's Department is refusing to allow the FBI to process critical physical evidence at the FBI's National Crime Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. Specifically, the gloves recovered 1.5 miles from Nancy's home and DNA samples collected from the crime scene itself. The FBI wants that evidence sent to Quantico. The FBI's National Crime Lab is the preeminent forensic facility in the world. It has more advanced analytical technology, faster processing times, more experienced personnel, and greater capacity than any other forensic laboratory in the country. When a life is on the line, when every hour counts, when biological evidence degrades with each passing day, sending that evidence to Quantico is not just the obvious choice. It is the only defensible choice. Sheriff Nanos declined. He chose instead to send evidence to DNA Labs International, a private laboratory in Fort Myers, Florida, which holds a contract with Pima County at a reported cost of approximately $200,000. His stated rationale was consistency. He wants all evidence processed through the same facility. Former federal prosecutors and retired FBI agents have gone public in their condemnation of this decision. Media figures devoted hours of coverage to it. The argument is not subtle. Why? When an 84-year-old woman who needs her heart medication is missing somewhere in the Arizona desert or beyond, when you have the most capable forensic laboratory in the world offering its full resources, would any law enforcement official route the evidence to a private contractor in Florida? The critics offer one answer, and they are not gentle about it. Jurisdictional ego. The desire of a county sheriff to maintain control over a case that has grown far beyond his department's usual scope, and the institutional unwillingness to let a federal agency with infinitely greater resources be seen doing the job better. Nanos has denied this characterization. He says he is ensuring consistency and following his department's protocols. But the optics are catastrophic and the practical consequences are real. DNA degrades. Every day that evidence sits in an evidence locker waiting for a private laboratory in Florida to process, it is a day that biological material deteriorates, that contamination risk increases, that the single most valuable piece of physical evidence in this investigation potentially becomes less useful in a courtroom. And this is not the only misstep. Early in the investigation, the Pima County Sheriff's Department released Nancy's home back to the family before completing their forensic examination of the scene. Then they had to return, re-enter the property, and conduct additional evidence collection. In criminal forensics, the integrity of a crime scene is non-negotiable. Once a location is released to family members or other non-investigators, and people have moved through it, the chain of custody for anything found afterward is weakened. Evidence may have been inadvertently moved, contaminated, or lost. That is not a minor procedural error. That is a mistake that defense attorneys will examine carefully if this case ever reaches a courtroom. Meanwhile, the FBI continues to do what it can within the jurisdictional constraints that limit it. The reward has been doubled to $100,000 with no questions asked. Digital billboards displaying Nancy's photograph and the suspect description are active in Los Angeles, Phoenix, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Albuquerque. Agents are conducting door-to-door canvassing throughout the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. They are requesting surveillance footage from every residential and commercial camera in the relevant search areas. They are following up on tips from an incoming flow that now represents tens of thousands of submissions. Behavioral analysts are building profiles. Linguistic specialists are examining the ransom notes. Digital forensics teams are tracing the blockchain transactions connected to the ransom wallet. The full machinery of federal investigation is running at capacity. But its single most important task, processing the DNA from the discarded gloves at the best laboratory in the world, is being blocked by a county sheriff who will not yield jurisdiction over evidence storage. The behavioral profile that emerges from this case, when you synthesize all of the evidence, is specific in ways that should help investigators narrow their focus. The suspect is someone with local knowledge. They know the Catalina Foothills neighborhood. They know Nancy's home, its layout, its camera positions, its entry points. They know her schedule and her patterns. That knowledge comes from personal familiarity or from sustained surveillance conducted over a period of weeks. The January 11th footage request suggests the latter began at minimum 3 weeks before the crime. The suspect is organized in their planning but inexperienced in execution. They spent significant time preparing. They researched camera placement and came prepared to deal with it. They brought the right equipment. They chose a brand of backpack that would be difficult to trace. They wore a mask and gloves. They came armed. But when they encountered the camera in the doorbell footage, their response was reactive and improvised. They tried solutions in sequence rather than implementing a prepared approach. A truly experienced operative would not have approached the front door at all. The suspect has some familiarity with cryptocurrency and technology, but not at an expert level. They chose Bitcoin as their ransom mechanism, which requires at least a working knowledge of wallet setup and transaction processes. But they may not fully understand the traceability of blockchain transactions, or they chose Bitcoin knowing it was their best option rather than believing it was genuinely anonymous. The suspect has a connection to Nancy Guthrie that goes beyond random selection. The dog's silence. The entry without forced intrusion. The pacemaker left behind like a message. The precision of the surveillance timeline. All of these elements point towards someone for whom this was personal. Someone who knew her or knew about her in detail that a random stranger would not possess. And the suspect is, right now, somewhere, living some version of a normal life while the FBI's billboards show their masked image in 5 American cities, while their discarded gloves sit in an evidence locker, while tens of thousands of tips are processed by investigators looking for the one that connects. They are aware of the coverage. They may be watching this very content. And that awareness creates pressure. Pressure creates mistakes. Mistakes leave evidence. Evidence leads to arrests. What needs to happen in this investigation is not complicated to describe, though it has apparently proven complicated to execute. Those gloves need to be processed at Quantico. That is not a preference. That is an urgency. The jurisdictional standoff between the Pima County Sheriff and the FBI needs to be resolved in favor of speed and capability over institutional pride, and it needs to happen now. Every passing day that evidence sits waiting is a day that the case grows colder and Nancy's health deteriorates further. The Bitcoin wallet transactions need to be traced fully. Every movement of funds on that blockchain is recorded permanently and permanently accessible to investigators with the right analytical tools. The ransom demand created a digital breadcrumb trail that leads somewhere real, and following it to the end is not optional. The surveillance footage from January the 11th needs to be found and analyzed. Somewhere in a neighbor's doorbell camera, a traffic monitoring system, a business security feed, there may be a vehicle or a person who does not belong in that neighborhood at that hour 3 weeks before the crime. That footage may already be in investigators' hands. The specificity of the request suggests they have a reason to focus on it. The biological evidence from the crime scene needs to be fully processed and compared. Blood has DNA. If blood from anyone other than Nancy is present at the scene, that is identification waiting to happen. If the pacemaker retains trace evidence from whoever handled it, that is another path. Every surface of that house that was touched, every object that was moved, every point of contact between the suspect and the physical environment of that home is a potential source of material that places a specific human being at the scene. And the person who knows something needs to come forward. Not necessarily the suspect. The person who noticed a change in someone's behavior around February the 1st. The person who heard something said in confidence that now has a different meaning. The person who saw a vehicle where it should not have been. The person who was told something they did not understand at the time. $100,000 is a real amount of money. It is available to the right person right now. And more importantly, Nancy Guthrie's life is on the other side of that decision. Nancy has been without her pacemaker connection and her heart medication for 13 days. She is 84 years old with chronic cardiac conditions. The medical reality of this situation is not something investigators can speak about candidly in front of cameras, but it is something every person following this case understands. Time is not on her side. If she is alive and being held somewhere, her health is in serious jeopardy with every passing hour. If she is receiving no medical care, the chances of her survival decrease measurably each day. The family knows this. The investigators know this. The public knows this even when no one says it directly. And yet the family continues to behave as though she is alive. They continue to post. They continue to plead. They continue to offer payment. They continue to send messages directed at whoever has her. And perhaps that is the right posture. Both because it may be accurate and because giving up is not something this family is capable of doing. Nancy raised these people. She raised them after losing her husband at 49. She raised them in circumstances that would have produced bitterness and did not. They are not capable of abandoning her. This case is solvable. That is the most important thing to understand. It is not a mystery without physical evidence. It is not a cold case built on nothing but witness memory. There is forensic material. There is digital evidence. There is a clear suspect image. There is a trail of discarded gloves 1.5 miles from the crime scene. There is blockchain data connected to the ransom wallet. There is surveillance footage from a camera that everyone assumed was dead. There is a timeline of pre-surveillance activity that may have been captured on neighboring cameras. The evidence exists. The question is only whether investigators can assemble and process it fast enough and cooperate effectively enough to close this case, while the outcome is still a rescue and not a recovery. Cases like this do not stay unsolved forever. They break. They break when someone talks. They break when a piece of evidence finally gets the analysis it has been waiting for. They break when a digital transaction is traced to its origin point. They break when someone who has been sitting on information finally decides that keeping the secret costs too much. They break when a mistake made in the dark finally becomes visible in the light. The mistakes have already been made. The evidence is already there. What comes next is the intersection of investigative work, forensic science, and the human tendency to eventually crack under the weight of what we know. And that intersection always produces an answer. Always. Nancy Ellen Guthrie, born the 27th of January, 1942, 84 years old, mother of 3, grandmother, church volunteer, widow who rebuilt her world from nothing and kept going. Sharp, warm, faithful, loved beyond measure by the people who knew her and by a nation that has watched her daughter beg for her return on a screen every few days for nearly 2 weeks. She was taken from her home in the early hours of February the 1st, 2026, in a crime that was planned, deliberate, and deeply personal. And she deserves to come home. If you know anything about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, please contact the FBI tip line, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, or Crime Stoppers. A $100,000 reward is active with no questions asked about how you came to know what you know. You can remain completely anonymous. Whatever you know, however small it seems, call it in. The case-breaking detail might be sitting in your memory right now, and you might not even recognize it as significant. And if the person who took Nancy is watching this, hear this clearly. Every hour that passes narrows your options and widens the investigation. The gloves are going to be processed. The blockchain is being traced. The cell tower data is mapped. The surveillance footage from January the 11th exists somewhere, and investigators are looking for it. The net is tightening around you, and it will close. It is not too late to make a different choice. Let her go. Let her come home. That is all anyone is asking. That is all her family wants. That is all this case is about. A woman who deserves to be home, in her house in the Catalina foothills, with her dog and her medications and her church and her children. Just let her come home. This is Buried Secret Media. This case is not over. We will be here as it develops, bringing you confirmed facts, following the evidence wherever it leads, refusing to convict anyone without cause, and refusing to let Nancy Guthrie's story fade from the public eye until there is an answer. Because the truth is always buried somewhere, and we will always dig until we find it. If this story matters to you, and if you believe cases like this deserve sustained, serious attention, please hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below telling us what you think investigators should prioritize, and subscribe to Buried Secret Media so you never miss an update. Every subscriber keeps this story alive. Every like puts it in front of new eyes. And new eyes might be the ones that see what everyone else has missed. Nancy, we are looking for you. We have not given up. We will not give up. And to everyone watching, stay alert, stay engaged, and if you see something, say something.